Hello, children. Mr. Dunn here, and we're going to review Chapter 17, Part 2 together. Our big topics for today are new immigration, Chinese exclusion, and American imperialism, with the United States reaching into new places such as Hawaii. We gain new territories in the Spanish-American War. We extend our reach and, power into East Asia. And then there's, of course, Americans who weren't excited about all of this expansionism, so that group would be the anti-imperialist. Our essential question for today is, what motives fueled U.S. imperialism? Question mark. All right, so let's get into it. So first things first, there is a wave of new immigrants coming into the United States, and they are primarily coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. So at the beginning of the course, we talked about some of the largest migrant groups being the Germans and the Irish. Now that has shifted to new groups in Europe from Southern and Eastern Europe. These are different Europeans that are coming to the United States, and they were thought to be less civilized than those earlier groups. They were thought to have been like more crime, inclined to crime, or maybe bringing some elements that the United States shouldn't have accepted in. And so there is going to be a pushback because there's so many of them coming that Americans, of course, get upset about it. And that's something that we just know is consistent in American history. So there started to be these like immigration restrictions because there was declining birth rates. And because of like the depressions of the late 1800s, people thought that America might be taken over or begin to be run by the wrong types of people, not the right kind of European stock, as they would say. And then there was another group, the Immigration Restriction League, that was a nativist group. We need to remember that word. I should have highlighted it here. That pushed to limit immigration because they thought that immigrants would bring crime and poverty, and that they would take American jobs. And so in 1903, there were some restrictionist laws that barred those who were deemed to be mentally unfit or poor or too poor to come into the United States, along with people who had like political issues back in their own country. And then there was also Chinese exclusion. This was the first time that the United States implemented race-based immigration discrimination. And then another big change to kind of challenge the influence of immigrants was something called the Australian or secret ballot in voting, which is just privacy in voting. But as we mentioned before, during the time of the Gilded Age and the time of the political machine, people would or political parties rather, would give voters just a ticket and say, hey, you don't even have to read it, just go vote for everybody. Like it's already done for you. Just drop it in the box, right? And you don't have to be literate to do that. You don't have to know how to read or write at all to be able to do that. But with the Australian ballot, people have to start making choices. And if you're not literate in English, then you maybe might make the wrong decision for yourself. So again, that was implemented intentionally to hurt immigrant voters. All right, now let's talk about Chinese exclusion. So we know that the Chinese immigrants came into the United States in large numbers in the late 1800s or the mid 1800s to participate in the gold rush, and then eventually in the railroad industry, and then of course eventually into services like restaurants and laundering and all of these great things. Well, in 1875, the United States started to exclude Chinese women, and it was said that it was because of prostitution. But it even included women that were the wives or even daughters of the men who were already here. So that just didn't make any sense. But again, there was an attempt to limit Chinese migrants because it was assumed that they were maybe taking jobs or opportunities from Americans in the West. And then officially in 1882, the United States government implemented the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so this was supposed to have temporarily excluded all Chinese immigrants, but over time, this immigration restriction would include more East Asian nationalities, to include like the Japanese and other East Asian groups, to the point where it just became a general restriction all the way until the 1960s. Now, to make sure that the people who were already here were officially U.S. citizens, the United States government implemented photo ID cards. So the whole reason that we have photo ID today has like a terrible kind of history behind it, because it was used first to identify people of Chinese descent to make sure that they were actually supposed to be here. And then of course in the West they had segregated schooling, and then busing restrictions and segregation, similar things that we would have seen in the South at this time. All right, so now we need to move on to changes in labor. So one of the new labor union groups was the American Federation of Labor. We know that the Knights of Labor, they kind of died out because of the earlier Haymarket Square riot and the situation surrounding that. But for the American Federation of Labor, they were very different than the Knights of Labor. They didn't accept everybody. They were very restrictive. They only accepted white men, so that obviously pushes a lot of people out. But they also only accepted skilled workers. So that means that people who maybe had to go through some kind of apprenticeship, we're talking maybe, engineers who work on trains, like these really kind of what we would call like, skilled blue collar jobs, not like your regular everyday workers, and especially not farmers. And then another thing is they weren't trying to necessarily change like society, right? Like they weren't trying to accept women and minority groups. They just wanted better pay, better hours, and better working conditions. So even though they were restrictive, that singular focus of theirs, it allowed them to last a little bit longer. I don't know why I just said longer like that. All right, so we also have this imperialism of the United States. So we have to talk about the context for the time period. So in the 1800s, European powers and other Western countries started to take over lands all across the world. One of the biggest instances of this was the scramble for Africa. European powers pretty much invaded Africa, carved it up for themselves, and colonized it for the resources to fuel industrialism. Europeans had also made their way into East Asia, and in some ways they colonized there for sure. For example, the British would take over South Asia or India. The British would have a very strong presence in China. The Dutch would take over Indonesia. The Spanish had taken over the Philippines a little bit earlier than that. But their whole goal was to colonize and to take the resources, again, to fuel their industrial pursuits. Another goal of theirs was to, a secondary goal was to try to, like, quote unquote, civilize the non-Western world. They felt like these places were behind and they needed to save them. And there was a book written by a British author, Rudyard Kipling, and it was called The White Man's Burden. And it was about this kind of idea that they needed to be like a savior to the rest of the world. So America's kind of behind in this sense. Like, we're still like a teenager in terms of our age as a country. Like, we're not like the adult countries that are taking over other places. So we figured maybe we should get in on this imperialism thing, and we do. So one way that we do that is we purchase Alaska from Russia for a certain amount of money, and I think it was like $7 million. But Americans kind of laughed at that. They were like, man, like, why did we just buy this big box of ice? Well, the guy who was over it, he was made, in charge of that purchase, William Seward. He was made fun of, but he would be vindicated when they found, gold in Alaska, and then eventually he would be vindicated when they found oil there much later. Now, another big thing is that American companies have started to reach out to sell our products to the rest of the world. One of them was Singer Sewing Machine. So this was a great sewing company. It's still around today. They started to sell these really great sewing machines to individual consumers so that they wouldn't have to maybe purchase their clothes from a store. They could maybe make their own clothes. And then, of course, Rockefeller Standard Oil had an amazing reach around the world as well. Now, there were some American government officials who pushed for expansionism. One of them being a guy we definitely need to know. His name was Alfred Thayer Mahan. And he wrote a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And in his book, he studied the largest militaries in the world, especially those like starting when, like Christopher Columbus came over, like Spain and France and Britain. And what he found about all of those countries is that they had a large navy, and they also had a lot of colonial possessions, like the British having control of the 13 colonies, or France having control of present-day Canada. So he said the United States needed to do the same thing. And there's another reason that he said that we needed to do this, and it's not in here, but I'll give you a quote. He said, if America doesn't have colonial possessions, it'll be like land birds not able to fly. During times of war, it'll be like land birds not able to fly far from its shore. And so what he was suggesting there is that the United States needed refueling stations all around the world because if we needed to fight someone really far, then we needed to be able to refuel, and if we couldn't do that, then we would be restricted to just fighting in our hemisphere, and we would be limited, and we wouldn't be able to protect our interests abroad. So another guy, James D. Blaine, he advocated for annexing Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, and maybe we do that. So with regards to Hawaii, they were an independent country initially. There were Americans there who had gotten into the sugar planting industry. There were missionaries there, and so their descendants have kind of pretty much taken over the economy of Hawaii. But they still have a queen, Liliuokalani, who they wanted to get out of the way. So they lock her in her palace. They write this new constitution. The United States had already had a naval base there, so we were in a little bit of a way supportive of the efforts of this takeover. And then after the Spanish-American War, we annexed the country. One of the people that, advocated for this was a guy, Sanford B. Dole, of the Dole Food Co. Today, you may know them for their Dole pineapple cans that you may see in the grocery store. But he was also somebody that advocated for this, and he should be highlighted here. We need to know him. Now, this is a time period of intense nationalism. This is a time where the United States makes a Pledge of Allegiance. The Star Spangled Banner gets a soundtrack. People have this reverence for the flag. Like people are just kind of totally into this idea of America being the greatest because we're trying to compete with the rest of the world at this point. Another development that we need to know about is yellow journalism. So this was a type of newspaper that printed sensationalized news. Now, there could have been some truth to it for sure, but their goal was to sell newspapers, and they would lie if they had to. So it's something that we would probably call like fake news today. Now we have to talk about the Spanish-American War. Its nickname was a splendid little war because it didn't take very long, but after it, we got a lot of stuff. So in 1868, the Cuban people began to revolt against Spain. They began to push for their independence. This is one of like the last pieces of America that Spain still controls. There's American businesses there, and there was a sense that because the Spanish were so brutal to the Cuban people, that maybe we needed to protect our business interests. Like things are getting kind of crazy down there. There was newspapers printing that Americans were being attacked, even though it wasn't true. So we send a ship down there, the USS Maine, and that ship blows up. And nobody knows why, but of course the newspapers ran with it and they blamed it on Spain. And so based off of that, 270 Marines die. Based off of those newspapers, the United States declares war against Spain. Now, truth be told, it was a boiler on the ship that had exploded. It had nothing to do with Spain at all. But just like that, we're pulled into this war. So only 400 Americans died, which is a relatively small number for a war. Most of them died from like malaria, like dysentery or something like that, not from actually battle wounds or anything. But after the war, when we defeated Spain, we took some land. We took the Philippines from them. We took Puerto Rico, Guam, and we had a very strong relationship over Cuba, like a protectorate relationship over Cuba. So it was almost like they couldn't do anything unless we were, in approval of it. And then, of course, there was a future president who fought there and gained notoriety. His name was Theodore Roosevelt. We'll talk about him later. All right. So you may think, if this war was about Cuba, why in the world did the United States go all the way to the Philippines to take that from Spain? Well, that was the whole goal of the war, was to take all this land from Spain. And of course, what's right next door to Spain? China. And there were all these other Western countries who were already there who had what were called spheres of influence. They had all these places that they could trade in. So the United States issued the open door policy, pretty much demanding that we be able to trade there too, because they have a lot of people. And if we could gain access to their markets abroad, then we could sell a lot of stuff to their lot of people. All right. Now, after the Spanish-American War, the Filipino people do fight back. They pretty much had pushed, were excited to help get rid of Spain, but they were not excited to be under the thumb of America. So we had to fight another war to stop them from trying to push for independence. And then there were, of course, Americans who did not like imperialism. They thought that it went against American ideals to force people under our flag. Like, that's not what America is about. It's literally in our Declaration of Independence to not do that. And there were some people that just felt like it would create competition for jobs with all of the new immigrants coming in. That's it.